So when it comes to the green anaconda, there are a lot of size claims out there. The claims range from the massively massive super gigantormous claims of 100 feet or more to 50 to 60 feet, though most seem to say about 30 feet. In fact, if you try to look up what was the largest anaconda ever recorded, you will probably get bombarded with sources saying the largest anaconda ever was a 33-footer that weighed 882 pounds from Brazil. So, right off the bat, can we say they at least get to 33 feet? Well, I'm not so sure about that.
But they were all of them deceived.
So this snake isn't a green anaconda, it's a reticulated python, another very large snake that is found in Southeast Asia rather than South America. The photo is blurry, but the patterns and coloration do seem to suggest a reticulated python, but this picture is often mixed with other pictures of what do seem to be a green anaconda, probably from a different construction site. So let's look into the backstory of this anaconda, that's actually a reticulated python, is that it was found on a construction site. Now, some stories say it was killed in a demolition, other stories say that a demolition caused it to come out of a cave, but most stories say the snake was killed at some point, though it looks alive to me in this particular photo. The problem is, it is difficult to get many details from this story. There doesn't seem to be any interview from anyone at the scene, and it doesn't seem like any herpetologist went to the scene either. Now, even though this snake isn't an anaconda, perhaps we should look at the size claims, because this snake wouldn't just be the biggest reticulated python, but the longest and heaviest modern snake ever found. Obviously the extinct titanoboa was bigger, but that's extinct. Now, don't get me wrong, I think this is a real photo, but are the measurements real? Or are they even measurements? Perhaps they are someone's estimates. Now you might be saying, come on, 33 feet, 882 pounds? It's a little specific for an estimate. Surely a person would have guesstimated a round number, right? The thing is, most countries in Southeast Asia use the metric system. So the original numbers would have been a nice round 10 meters and 400 kilos, that I imagine were translated to imperial when they made their way over to all the American sites that reported the snake. Now that in itself isn't a smoking gun, but perhaps it's of note. Now on other How Big videos, people comment things like, oh, so the people who were there and measured it don't count because someone looked at the photo and said nah. But again, I'm asking who measured it. The thing is, snakes are difficult to measure even when you have a specimen because of the way they can stretch and contort. So in an ideal world, you'd want a snake specialist who could account for that to do the measurements. But forget that for a minute, because look, if the construction workers laid the snake out and measured it with a standard measuring tape, it might not be 100% accurate, but it would at least be pretty close. So did they measure it? Well, if so, where is the picture of the snake with the measuring tape beside it? Surely that would be a good photo to take. And surely they'd have a measuring tape at a construction site. Even if it was only like a 5-meter tape, you could still measure it by the snake to show it was only half the length, right? In fact, there isn't a photo of the snake completely stretched out at all. And again, we don't know where the number or numbers even come from. Was it from someone at the site with the python? Or was it from someone who saw the photo and made an estimate? I wish someone with more expertise would look at the photo and try to analyze the size, but since I haven't found that, just to satisfy my own curiosity, I've tried to do it myself. So in the photo we have an excavator that we will need to use for scale. Now, I don't know a whole lot about excavators, but I have been looking through a bunch of different sizing charts and diagrams, and while I can't see the make, I think we are looking at an excavator in the medium range. Now obviously there are a variety of different models, but from what I've found they range from about 9.7 feet in height at the shorter end and 10.9 feet at the higher end. So again, not sure which one we are looking at, but at least we have a range. Now we have to make a few assumptions. We can't see the bottom of the snake on the right, but it looks like most of the snake is in frame. Maybe a foot or so is on the ground. Also, it isn't fully stretched out on the left, but let's say that if it was, it would reach the ground. Okay, so just to make it easier, I'm using a photo extender to generate the sides of the image, just so we can zoom out a little for convenience. Just remember, this part is the actual photo. If we assume the snake is on the apex of the arm, and that if it was stretched, about half would be on the left and half on the right, then we could have a range for our snake. Again, there's probably more snake on the right, but we'll correct for that. But anyway, taking the min and max height of our excavator arm, we can double it and get a rough range for our snake, which would be 19.4 feet, 5.9 meters, or 21.8 feet, 6.64 meters. Now let's be a bit more generous. Let's take the upper estimate and say there is maybe a little more of the snake on the ground, and that if we also stretch it out, we could overall get maybe another meter, or 3.2 feet. And then we'd have a length of 25 feet. 7.62 meters. And again, that's using the maximum arm height for a medium excavator and assuming the snake is right at the apex and then adding some to it. The final thing I'll say is that there are videos and images of both pythons and actual anacondas measured by biologists that we can compare. This is an 18-foot, 6-inch, 200-pound anaconda caught and measured by Paul Rosalie. We're going to talk about him more a little bit later, but here's the thing. Maybe the one in the excavator picture is bigger, but does it really look like it's 14 feet longer and 662 pounds heavier? In my humble and non-professional opinion, it is very unlikely that the snake in this photo is 33 feet long. My guess is someone saw this big snake and guessed it was about 10 meters long, and a bunch of media outlets ran with that number because it was so impressive and eye-catching. Again, I'm no expert, so take everything I say with a wheelbarrow of salt, but as you'll see as we go through this video, people often vastly overestimate the size of pythons and anacondas. Now that's just one picture. We've got other photos, videos, and studies to look at when determining the size of these snakes. We also have some important questions we will need to take a look at too, like do reptiles ever stop growing, and some variation of the what does the Shaq, Yao Ming, or Robert Wadlow of anacondas look like. And of course, this video is about green anacondas, as they are the biggest of the 4 anaconda species. And just before we begin, big shout out to my patrons for their support. So to start, maybe it would be fun to look at the super humongous snaky boys that we glossed over before. There is a video floating around of an anaconda swimming across a river, and the snake in question is supposed to be 50 feet long. The video is a bit blurry, but the snake does look massive. It looks to be the width of the river. So is this video real? Yes, but it's been altered in a pretty simple way. Someone cropped the video and then stretched it out to make it look wider than it actually is. The original video is on YouTube, it's much clearer, and it's vertical. The title of the video is in Portuguese, and it translates to Giant Anaconda Crossing the Road. So it's a road, not a wide river. Now the snake is still big, but using this flooded road as a scale, it is estimated to be about 15 feet long, not 50. Next, let's look at photos of an anaconda that's not just big, it's large. These photos claim to show an anaconda that was 134 feet long, that had eaten 257 people and 2,325 animals before being caught. Now, not to mess you around, these photos are fake. That might be a real snake, but all the vehicles and soldiers are toys. Apparently, these photos came from a student film in 2010. The other thing is that there haven't been any recorded cases of humans being killed by an anaconda, let alone 257. I know this video isn't about that, but I just thought I'd throw it out there, especially since when you watch biologists trying to catch anacondas, they have to sneak up on them because anacondas usually flee at the first sign of humans. Now 134 feet seems too ridiculous to be true, but I guess I should mention that there are some bigger size claims. There are reports of a creature referred to as Yacumama, which translates to Mother of the Water. Now I've seen some sources say that this is another name for the green anaconda, but others say it is a completely different snake. Either way, the size claims go up to 50 meters, or 164 feet. You can watch interviews of natives in Peru who have claimed to have seen one. There's also a website called bigsnakes.info that have done years of research on the topic. Now, to be clear, they seem to be in the camp that Yacumama isn't an anaconda, so I don't want to spend too long on this, but is there any evidence of these snakes existing? Well, there seem to be some villages that allegedly had been damaged, and there are also satellite photos, but unfortunately they aren't very clear, and I'm not so sure they're showing a snake. The other thing is that these snakes will be many times larger than Titanoboa, which as far as we know was the largest snake that ever lived, and it is theorized that it was able to get that big due to the warmer climate of the late Paleocene. A paper called Gigantism, Temperature, and Metabolic Rate in Terrestrial Poikilotherms. Poikilotherms can't regulate their own body temperature. But anyway, this paper might explain why it could get so big, and perhaps it would be unlikely for a snake to reach or exceed that size in a modern climate. I'd also be very cautious of extremely large anaconda pictures. They are very prevalent online, and any fool can Photoshop a sloppy photo together, especially for a clickbait YouTube thumbnail. Next, let's shift gears and look at some scientific studies done on wild green anaconda and their sizes. There was a dissertation published by Jesus Antonio Rivas back in 2000 titled The Life History of the Green Anaconda, with emphasis on its reproductive biology. Definitely worth a read if you have any interest in green anacondas, but in particular there's a section called How Large Can an Anaconda Be? Perfect. So what did he say? Well, there are many accounts of snakes around 9 to 11 meters. A lot of controversy concerns the credibility of the records. The confusion created by the fact that skins stretch when snakes are skinned, and animals whose length was merely estimated or measured with unreliable methods. It is striking that the largest snake that I have caught out of 780 animals is only a little more than 5 meters. What is the reason for such a difference? Why have I not found any animal near 9 to 11 meters? The slow growth rate of the anaconda requires a long time to reach a large size. Very interesting to read. I wonder, would we consider 780 anacondas a large sample size? I guess it depends on how many green anacondas we have. Now obviously no one can know that, but do we have any estimates? Most sources don't even try to estimate how many we have. One source, PawsGeek, which I guess is like an animal facts website, said there were an estimated 2,000. But I don't know where they got that number from. I mean, the green anaconda has a pretty wide range from South America and Trinidad. It's even become an invasive species in Florida, along with the Burmese python. So I doubt that Jesus caught nearly 40% of all green anacondas just in the Venezuelan llanos. So I don't know, that number seems way too low to me. I'd imagine the true number is much higher, and perhaps the sample size isn't that good of a representation. We also have to consider, as I just mentioned, that these anacondas were caught in one particular area, an area that may not have been a good place to look for the extra big ones. To quote the paper, "My study area is a cattle ranch where the protection of wildlife is a recent practice. Presumably, the really large animals might have been killed off earlier, and the animals that occur now in the areas where I studied might have not had enough time to grow to really large sizes. So perhaps if we look in other areas we can find bigger anacondas. It seems to be accepted by many that the biggest anacondas live in wetter areas deeper into swamps." To quote Mr. Rivas, "Limits are probably dependent on the environment and are likely to be less important when the females live in more permanent water or in an area without a long dry season." By the way, when we are talking about big anacondas, we are talking about big females, as they are much bigger than males. And again, we are just focusing on green anacondas, as the other 3 species are smaller. Now, there have been other searches. A crew of German wildlife photographers and biologists went on a trip to Guyana to try and find some big anacondas, and they brought some pretty cool tech with them. They had like a mini helicopter drone thing, but the cool thing was that it had cameras, distance measuring, and a GPS transmitter. So it was able to scan and measure animals. Using the drone, they found an anaconda that was measured at 5.5 meters, about 18 feet. Pretty big, but they wanted bigger. Unfortunately, they crashed the drone and the GPS malfunctioned or something, so they couldn't find it. They also heard about an area where there were stories of anaconda that ate cattle. Sometimes the green anaconda has the nickname bull snake due to this reputation. So when they found the swamp, they put their submersible drone in and something big smacked it into the reeds. So one of the team jumped in to retrieve it and found a big anaconda down there. She estimated it to be about 8 meters, 26.24 feet long, which is pretty massive. I want to emphasize though that this was an estimate made underwater in murky conditions, so I imagine it might have been a little smaller than that. They also had a car drone that they brought out at night to try and find some anacondas. They found a smaller male and followed him to a breeding ball with a big female and a bunch of smaller males, as female green anacondas are polyandrous. So cool find, but I don't think she was exceptionally big. Many of you probably know the biologist Forrest Galante. He also did a search to find giant anaconda in Brazil, and he found a big anaconda, the largest he had ever seen. He and his team measured the snake at about 19 feet long, and it weighed 300 pounds. As mentioned before, Paul Rosalie found an anaconda that measured at 18 foot 6 inches and weighed 220 pounds. Though, he told a story on the Joe Rogan podcast and the Lex Friedman podcast of an anaconda that he found in the floating forest in the floodplains of the central Brazilian Amazon. He found the anaconda at 2 a.m., saw it was huge, and tried to jump on it to catch it. Now it escaped, not too surprisingly since it was gigantic, but how big? Well, Paul wasn't able to measure it, and it was in the middle of the night. This also happened when he was 20 years old. He is now 46, so it happened more than 20 years ago, but he estimates it was about 24 to 25 feet long, about 7.6 meters. Some comments under the Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman podcasts say the story is made up. I don't know about that, but I will say since it happened in the dark and it is an estimate and it happened years ago, I think there is a chance it could be a bit of an overestimate. Now Paul has been around a bunch of anacondas, so maybe his estimates are more accurate than your average person, but I still think even the most experienced might be prone to overestimate a little. The thing is, there aren't any wild anacondas that have been measured longer than 20 feet. In fact, there is no wild anaconda that has been measured at 20 feet. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that means no larger ones exist. In fact, the chances that we have caught the biggest wild anaconda are probably low, considering it has a wide range, and that it can camouflage pretty well in vegetation, and even better in water, where the big ones like to hang out, and that anacondas are mostly nocturnal. There are a lot of challenges. But if we take the Forest Galante snake and say it was about 19 feet, again, they did measure the snake, but they had to do it quick and a bit rough so they could release the snake. But let's say 19 feet, maybe a little bigger. But if this isn't the biggest, how much bigger would the biggest be? Often when you get into discussions about snakes, you hear, well, they never stop growing. But is this true? Kinda-ish. They are what is known as indeterminate growers, so their growth isn't genetically predetermined. So reptiles, which are indeterminate growers, will continue to grow after reaching adulthood, but at a much slower pace. In fact, a study done in 2008 described how growth rates decline in adulthood. There is a documented case of an adult free-ranging anaconda taking 13 years to grow little more than half a meter. And 13 years is a long time for a wild anaconda. It's hard to get a clear answer on how long they can survive in the wild, but the figure of 10 years comes up a lot. Now, even if that number is accurate, it would be an average, not the limit, and it seems the anacondas that live primarily in water would have a longer life expectancy, as they don't seem to have as many scars as other anacondas that frequent drier environments. Returning to the life history of anacondas, the big Sylvia found in the more watery environment had, quote, only 13 scars total, which is remarkably lower than the expected for an animal of its size, supporting the hypothesis that animals in more aseasonal habitats face less risk of wounds from their prey. But less is still not zero. Wild anacondas have to deal with being preyed upon as they grow, and even when they are huge, there is still a risk of injury from prey. In fact, many scars in anacondas seem to come from capybaras. Attacks of capybaras on anacondas are relatively common, as evidenced by scars and wounds on several female anacondas that uniquely match the size and shape of capybara teeth. So there are challenges to surviving long enough to grow in the wild. You have to avoid predation, then you have to avoid your prey injuring you, and you have to do it for a long time while your growth rate slows and slows. And anacondas aren't immortal. Even if they don't stop growing, they stop being alive. And again, life is tough in the wild. So maybe we can look at anacondas in captivity, so we can see how big they can get in a more controlled, safer environment. Well, let's cut right to the chase. The largest captive anaconda, in fact, the largest measured and verified green anaconda, was in Pittsburgh Zoo and Aquarium and was 6.27 meters, 20 foot, 7 inches. Now yeah, maybe they can get bigger than this, but many anacondas are kept in zoos and aquariums, and as pets even, and they have access to a steady supply of food, generally not live prey as people don't want to injure their animals, and often they have a watery, temperature-controlled environment, and they live for much longer than in the wild. Captive anacondas sometimes live up to 30 years, and yet 20 foot 7 inches is the max. Now I know some people are probably saying that, well, they can't perfectly replicate the natural environment and having a larger space is a factor. Sure, maybe, but considering everything else, shouldn't we get a little closer to this 30 foot size? It's kind of a big size gap. Like, if I show you a scale and we put our exceptionally big 6.27 meter 20 foot 7 inch snake and compare it to the 30 foot size claim, I mean, that's pretty large. Now just get the shack argument out of the way. The 20 foot 7 inch long snake is above average, not the average. So it is the shack. But then, where's the Robert Wadlow, the tallest man of all time? Well, I don't know that it works the same way with snakes and that a similar size difference would exist. I mean, Shaq and Robert also had access to food that didn't try and fight back, and they also probably didn't have to worry about getting eaten when they grew up. But just for fun, I guess, let's say this anaconda is Shaq. What would the Wadlow snake look like, given the same size difference? Again, this isn't based on anything scientific, just a little thought experiment, I guess. But Shaq is 7 feet 1 inches tall, and Robert Wadlow was 8 foot 11 inches. So Robert is 25.93% taller than Shaq. So going back to our snake, 25.93 of 20 feet 7 inches is approximately 5.34 feet. So based on this, the Wadlow snake would be 25.9 feet. Or if you look at the ratio of size difference being at 1.2588, then by that, the Robert Anaconda would be 26 feet 2 inches. So overall, you don't really get much more than 26 feet. And again, this isn't at all a scientific calculation. And we are still well below 30 feet. Before we go any further though, I just want to emphasize the estimation problem. Yeah, anacondas have been estimated to be bigger than this, but when it comes to snakes, estimation is very difficult. Even since the mid-1800s, naturalists like Alfred Russel Wallace noted that while there were indeed reports of anacondas between the sizes of 9 to 12 meters, 30 to 40 feet, direct observations only yielded snakes about 6 meters or 20 feet long. In the 1930s, a zoologist named Alpheus Hyatt Verrill and his team were in Guyana when they spotted a large anaconda curled up on a rock. Alpheus asked his team to estimate the length, and the estimates ranged from 6.1 meters, so 20 feet, to 18.3 meters, 60 feet. They then measured the snake and found it to be 5.9 meters, 19 feet, 4 inches. Even with captive snakes, people have a tendency to overestimate. There is a website called Snake House, a retirement home for snakes, and on the topic of size, they say, quote, "Many people greatly overestimate the size of their snakes. Every large snake we have taken in were reported to us as several feet longer than they actually were at intake." That's the thing with big snakes, the size is just so often exaggerated. If we look at the reticulated python, which is supposed to be the longest snake in the world, the anaconda is the second longest, but overall biggest due to overall mass. But anyway, there was a reticulated python in a zoo in Indonesia that was claimed or estimated to be 14.85 meters or 48 foot 9 inches long. When the snake was measured, it was proven to be somewhere between 6.5 to 7 meters long, 21 to 23 feet. And another thing is, the reticulated python is the longest snake in the world, apparently, sometimes getting to 25 feet or a bit more, but none verified at or above 30 feet. So how is the second longest snake longer? Also, with overestimation, studies have proven when people fear a snake, as many people do with the green anaconda, that they tend to overestimate the size of the snake. On the Florida Natural History Museum, under a section about how to accurately measure snakes using a string or rope, they also say most people overestimate the length of snakes they see. So if estimates aren't great, where are all these places getting the 30-foot length from? A lot of sources list that size. The Smithsonian lists it. On Snopes, the fact-checking site, it says 30 feet, as do multiple media outlets.
Show me.
And they list their source, National Geographic. Awesome, so let's look on Nat Geo to see how they measured an anaconda to get this size. Well, it doesn't say. It doesn't say where the anaconda was, who measured it, or how they measured it. There aren't any details really.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
And it seems to be the consensus that their claims that the green anaconda can grow to more than 29 feet and weigh more than 550 pounds is based on an estimate. And also on the Nat Geo Wild YouTube channel, they say they grow up to 25 feet long and weigh more than 300 pounds. Or at least one video says that, and then another video goes back to the 30-foot claim. There's one last piece of information I want to leave you from the scientist Jesus Rivas, who has written a ton of papers on green anacondas and has studied them for more than 3 decades. And before anyone comments, oh, a scientist sitting at a desk thinks he knows everything, he has captured and measured more anacondas than anybody and takes people into the field all the time. There's a pretty cool video with him and Jack Randal searching for anacondas on YouTube. By the way, Jack Randal has a cool YouTube channel, you should check him out. But anyway, I digress. He tried to determine the maximum size of an anaconda based on breeding conditions. The breeding frequency reduces with size, which means at a certain point, a female is no longer able to breed. For the anaconda, this is estimated to be 6.7 meters, 22 feet in length. So in conclusion, to try and answer the title of this video, I would say while big anacondas are out there, and probably even bigger than we have ever recorded, I'd imagine them somewhere being in the low 20s in terms of feet long, rather than, or even close to the 30s. But hey, what would I know? By the way, for anyone wondering about this photo of an alleged 50-foot snake, whether it's authentic or not, it was taken in the Congo, so it wouldn't be an anaconda. But if you'd like to learn more about it, friend of the channel, Truth is Scarier Than Fiction, made a great video diving in and examining the photo. I'll link it below and post it at the end. This is a video I've wanted to make for years, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribing if you're not already. Anyway, thanks again to my amazing patrons, and thank you for watching. I hope you have a good day.